First paper will be Sophia Brown from the University of Kent, and the paper is entitled Living the High Life, the Radical Reconfiguration of Palestinian Space in Larissa Sansour's Nation Estate.
So yeah, what I'm going to do today is sort of give a bit of an introduction to Sansour's work, specifically this work obviously, do a bit of an analysis about what I think is significant about it in terms of what she's saying about the conflict, about Palestinian space, the way in which she reconfigures it in her project, and then because of my own background as someone who looks at autobiography, I will then focus on why I'm reading it autobiographically, what I think is interesting about it in terms of these ideas of autobiographical practice, life writing, etc., which is the field that I work in. Towards the end of Nation Estate, which was produced in 2012, the central character of the film, who is played by Sansour herself, surveys the disturbing landscape of a future Palestine-Israel. Her vantage point is the top of a prison-like skyscraper that encapsulates the entire Palestinian state, whose citizens are unable to access their homeland, but who can look over it from within their tower, located next to Jerusalem. The skyscraper has reconstructions of Palestinian locales on every floor, inverting the topography of Palestine by placing, for example, you can see a little bit from your slide. I should probably actually mention that as well as producing a video, which I'll show a clip from, she produced a series of images, and this is one of them obviously. So placing, for example, Jericho, which is obviously one of the lowest points of Earth, on the 13th floor, far above the traditionally elevated city of Jerusalem. And at the end of the film, Sansour looks across the real Jerusalem and its hills and wears a look of resigned horror at her circumstances. So it's this reconfiguring of space in nation state and the ramifications of this, both in terms of talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict and also on a personal level as her own perspective as an artist and an artist in exile and an artist from Jerusalem that my paper is going to look at. So Nation Estate began as an ironic response to the concept of joie de vivre. And this kind of irony is obvious from the beginning. You can see at the end of the hallway this reconstruction, a poster, which she uses as the poster for the project, which is this. So they're living the high life. And the project was conceived in the wake of the PLO's failed bid for statehood at the UN in 2012 as well, I think, 2011. And funded by international aid money, Nation Estate comes with branding and advertising, an acknowledgement, I think, of both the NGOization of Palestinian society and the neoliberal standards that are now unavoidable in the occupied territories. For this promotional poster, Sansour has adopted the iconic 1936 tourist poster that maybe some of you have seen, created by Franz Krauss, which is, so that's the original one. That at the time was obviously produced to communicate a very different message, a Zionist message to redeem the land and to establish a Jewish state in historic Palestine. This is from 1936. And actually, I don't know if people have been to the area, but today you will find this in lots of West Bank cafes, shops, supermarkets, and in East Jerusalem as well. And it's obviously putting forth to visit a very different Palestine to the original poster. And I think Sansour plays with this reappropriation and by removing kind of all traces of nostalgia in her own version. As you'll notice, in her poster, the skyscraper has replaced the Dome of the Rock, and therefore from the outset, we are introduced to a rather unnerving combination of dystopian science fiction, the skyscraper as a nation is a prison orbit and name, and advertising rhetoric. Once inside Nation Estate, we are shown posters publicising the best sushi on the block, located on the Gaza floor, and the Norwegian fjords that have supplied water to the building as part of Water Pipes for Peace. I'm just going to show a clip now so that my analysis will make sense. So that's Sansour. see that the separation wall is still there in the corner, and it's still obviously a very militarised zone because you've got the Israeli military towers completely surrounding it. I'd love to just let this play. That would be okay, so one thing that's really fascinating about the poster that she uses and the poster that obviously embedded within the skyscraper, as you've probably noticed, is that whilst the Dome of the Rock has been removed, its replacement is this idea of a Palestinian state, and not, for example, say the Jewish Third Temple that has been advocated on Zionist and Jewish and Christian Zionist right-wing groups. And I think that such an enigmatic reimagining of sacred space perhaps points to the ultimate authority of an expansionist neoliberal agenda, which sacrifices the holiness of this site, the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount, in exchange for extensive territorial gains for Israel, given that the Palestinians are now all within one space, and total control of Palestinian life, and perhaps with the PLO agreement, now that they finally have achieved their state. And within the skyscraper, the new Palestinian state is a homogenized and sanitized space, as you will have seen from the film. And we might see it as an example of what Marc Auger calls non-space, where we wait and live in an in-between state, such as at characterless airports, petrol stations and hotels. And given the extent to which waiting is inherent to Palestinian identity, whether at checkpoints or more profoundly in terms of waiting for the end to the conflict, I think this notion of non-space is particularly pertinent. What is particularly disturbing about Nation of State to me is that the protagonists no longer seem to be waiting for a real resolution to the conflict, for a fair resolution. There's no vibrancy or individuality, as demonstrated by the fact that they all dress the same, and there's minimal interaction between them. Characters do not speak to each other, and the only voices we hear are the pre-recorded adverts and the voices in the lifts giving the locations of the floors. Through this, I think Sansour is indicating that the Palestinians have given up. The concept of national identity has been transformed into that of a relic, showcased in a cold, museum-like environment, where cultural elements are ordered and categorised, where cities each appear neatly on no assigned floor. Added to this, the authentic elements that remain, such as the olive tree, and that's obviously the real Jerusalem in the background, such as the olive tree attempting to break free from the concrete floor and the spilt Arabic coffee, look completely out of place. They are also actually the only aspects of the film that seem in any way rebellious, which again emphasises the passivity of the Palestinians depicted. One aspect of the film that adds depth to these circumstances and their impact on human lives is Sansour's character's pregnancy, which becomes obvious at the end when she holds her belly and gazes over the real Jerusalem, as she sort of turns and looks out this window. The look of horror that she wears and the emphasis placed on her pregnant form forces the viewer to speculate on what kind of life her unborn child will have, what value that life will hold. Therefore, within nation states, along this reconfiguration, this radical reconfiguration of space, is the narration of self, of which Sansour's character's pregnancy is one aspect. I would argue that the work can be seen as an example of autographics, a word that's adopted by the well-known autobiography scholar Gillian Whitlock, as well as quite a lot of other people as well, to describe life narratives which use a variety of modes, technologies, designs, and especially highlighting the visual aspect. And the term was developed in response to the rise of visual performance work that's autobiographically inflected and allows for kind of a reconsideration of how we critique and categorise life narratives. And there's actually quite a lot of exciting work being done on this and being done on non-traditional forms of autobiography, which I'm trying to feed into. And Sansour herself has spoken about the importance of there being an intimate and a performative quality to her work, and it's for these reasons that she deliberately casts herself in her films, not just this one, but many others as well. And part of this intimacy, I believe, derives from the need to address the issue of Jerusalem, a place that is no longer accessible to her. I'm just going to quickly quote from the interview. I was born in Jerusalem, but like much of Palestinian history and culture, evidence of this is slowly being erased from the face of the earth. I cannot access Jerusalem now, and only memories of it remain, making reality as surreal as the universes I create in my work. So at the end of the film, as Sansour gazes over the real city of Jerusalem, we are left in no doubt that the simulated reality of the city housed in the skyscraper is of course no replacement for the real city that she has lost access to. The centrality of Jerusalem to her imagination is no doubt a result of her personal history and her sorrow at losing access to the city of her birth. She left Palestine when she was 15. Thus, her reconfiguration of space revolves around Jerusalem, hence the skyscraper's location overlooking the city. Her act of personal disclosure, her kind of autobiographical impulse, if you like, is to weave the importance of Jerusalem and her exile from it into her work and to make it part of the wider context of Palestinian statelessness, which a lot of her work deals with. By being so visually bold, she pushes her audience to think creatively about what Palestinian space is, what it has become, and what it could become. In their book, A Civilian Occupation, Rafi Segal and Eyal Weissman, prominent Israeli critics of the occupation, suggest that this Israeli strategy of settlement building in the West Bank is, and I quote, a worst-case scenario of capitalist globalization and its spatial fallout. So the hilltops of the West Bank, this is where this kind of worst-case scenario of security, segregation, seclusion takes us. What I find really fascinating about Sansour's work is that she kind of inverts this image to create her own worst-case scenario, to kind of create a vertical occupation which places the Palestinians on higher ground, but that nonetheless points to exactly the same policies of security, securitization, segregation, seclusion, etc. And by taking her reimagining of Palestine to such an extreme, she underlines the sheer vulnerability of Palestinian space today, forecasting the direction in which the conflict is headed. What space is left for Palestinians, she asks. How can we protect it?
Great.